To the east of the Misty Mountains lay the greatest forest of the north, the Forest of Mirkwood. It was home to many evils such as the Necromancer of Dol Guldur and the giant spiders, yet there were also forces of good that lived there, such as the Wood Elves. Did this forest always have such a foreboding reputation? What type of creatures lived inside it? And what happened to it after the ring's destruction? Hello friends, it's Carl here, and in today's episode we'll be exploring the darkness of Mirkwood. When the elves first awakened, the Vala or Ome led them to the Undying Lands, and they passed through a forest that would later be known as Mirkwood. Their journey led them to the Great River, and they saw the misty mountains towering in the distance, and some of the elves grew too afraid to cross them, and so they turned back. These were known as the Nandor elves, and they spread out across the land, and some of them made the Great Forest their home. They called it Greenwood the Great, and the elves that lived there were Sylvan elves or Wood Elves. Now during the Second Age, an elf named Orifer led a group of Cinder elves across the Misty Mountains to join the elves of Greenwood. They merged with the Wood Elf population, adopting their language and taking Sylvan names, and Orifer became their king. He established his kingdom in the southwestern corner of Greenwood, upon a hill called Amon Lanc, and it was the highest point in the area, and no trees grew upon it. And yet, the elves would not stay here for long, for as Sauron grew in power, Orifer led his people northwards 3 times, until they settled in the western valleys of the mountains of Greenwood. Though they maintained friendly relations with the dwarfs of Khazad-dûm and their kinsmen in Lothlorien, it's believed that they might have migrated northwards to distance themselves from these factions. Apart from the elves, we know that sometime during the Second Age, a group of men known as the Woodsmen established some villages near the western eaves of Mirkwood. Now Orifer's rule would come to an end in the Battle of the Last Alliance, where he was slain along with 2/3 of his army, and so his son, Thranduil, became king. For the first 1,000 years of his reign, the Greenwood Forest blossomed, and it was filled with many fur beasts and birds, and Thranduil was considered to be their greatest king. Though this would change when Sauron reappeared in Middle-earth as the Necromancer, and he built his fortress of Dol Guldur upon the hill of Amon Lanc that had once been the home of the Elves of Greenwood. His corruption and malice swept through the forest, twisting its creatures and plants, and Greenwood the Great would be renamed to Mirkwood. To escape the Necromancer's corruption, Thranduil retreated to the northeastern corner of Mirkwood, where he carved out a fortress with great halls spreading underground in many directions, and it is said that the dwarfs helped him build it. Now Sauron's corruption would keep spreading throughout the forest, and many evil creatures emerged from his fortress of Dol Guldur, which he used to attack the elves. Yet the elves managed to hold these creatures at bay, though by then most of Mirkwood had fallen to the corruption, and only the area surrounding Thranduil's realm was still wholesome. The mountains of Mirkwood would become the haunt of many of Sauron's most evil creatures, and they would earn a sinister reputation. Sauron also started summoning men to his service, for Easterlings were present in the southeastern regions of Mirkwood. This growing darkness would even affect the Hobbits, for they used to live in the upper vales of the Anduin, between the Forest of Mirkwood and the Misty Mountains. Though because of the Necromancer's growing power, they decided to cross over the mountains to find a new home, which would eventually become the Shire. At that time, many suspected that the fortress of Dol Guldur had been built by the Nazgûl, though Gandalf feared that it was actually a sign of Sauron's return. And so, in the year 2633 of the Third Age, he infiltrated the fortress of Dol Guldur, though the Necromancer fled before his true identity could be discovered. And after his retreat, a period known as the Watchful Peace would begin. This peace would last for around 400 years, until Sauron returned to Dol Guldur as the Necromancer once again, with his power increased. In the year 2841, Train, Thorin's father, set out to return to Erebor, though a black rain forced him to take shelter under the trees of Mirkwood, and he disappeared overnight, for he was kidnapped by Sauron's forces and taken to Dol Guldur, where he was tortured and his dwarven ring of power was taken from him. 5 years later, Gandalf would find him in the dungeons of Dol Guldur, though he had been driven mad, and he gave Gandalf a map and the key to the secret door of Erebor, and he died soon after. In the year 2941, while the quest to reclaim Erebor was underway, the White Council attacked Dol Guldur, and Sauron fled back to Mordor, and this allowed the forest to grow more wholesome for a while, for many evil creatures had been driven out of Mirkwood. However, only 10 years later, Sauron would send out 3 of his Nazgul, led by Khamûl, their second in command, to reoccupy Dol Guldur. Around this time, a new race of cunning trolls would be seen in Mordor and southern Mirkwood called the Olog-hai, having been created by Sauron. Due to Sauron's growing influence, many of the evil creatures that had been driven out of Mirkwood returned in greater numbers, and Mirkwood was an evil place again. The power of Dol Guldur stretched to the borders of the Old Forest Road, though it had many spies in the northern part of the forest, and these spies would learn that Aragorn found Gollum in Mirkwood, and a band of orcs were sent out of Dol Guldur over the mountains of Mirkwood, and they ambushed the elves that guarded Gollum, slaying them or taking them captive. During the War of the Ring, a black cloud lay above Dol Guldur, and an army would emerge from this fortress to wage war on the elves of Lothlorien and the elves and woodsmen of Mirkwood. These attacks set the forests aflame, causing significant damage, though the elves managed to repel Sauron's forces. This allowed Celeborn and Galadriel to launch a counterattack at Dol Guldur, and Galadriel tore down its walls, and the forest was finally cleansed from Sauron's evil. The forest would be renamed to Erin Lasgalen, meaning the woods of green leaves, and its land was divided. The northern part of the forest, up till the mountains of Mirkwood, would become Thranduil's realm, while Celeborn would claim the forest below the Narrows and call it East Lorien. The part of the forest between these two realms was given to the Beornings and the woodsmen of Mirkwood, and the forest was finally restored to its old beauty. When Sauron's corruption was still present in Mirkwood, very little wholesome food and water could be found in the forest. For example, there were many black squirrels, but they were said to have a horrible taste. However, one could still find nuts which were edible, though these were only available seasonally, and so they couldn't be relied upon. In fact, the elves would often leave the forest to hunt, and they traded with the men of Laketown for goods such as food or wine from the land of Dorwinion. Now there were 2 main paths into the forest, the main southern road, called the Old Forest Road, and the lesser-known northern path, called the Elven Road. The Old Forest Road was once called the Dwarf Road, and it was built by the dwarfs, perhaps as a trade route between their kingdoms during the Second Age. However, this road would fall to disuse, and its eastern end would be overgrown and impossible, and goblins would often be found on the spot. Now the Elven Road was found to the north of the Carrock, and it was free from goblins. However, it too had fallen to disuse, and its eastern edge was hard to pass through, and so only the Forest River offered a safe way out of the forest, and it was protected by the elves, since they used it to trade with the men of Laketown. One of the branches of the Forest River was the famous Black Stream that passed through the Elf Path. The stream was enchanted with a spell of forgetfulness and drowsiness, and there was once a wooden bridge passing across it, though it had rotted away. I believe the stream was most likely enchanted by elven magic, though I discussed this in another video which I'll link above. Now the forest was also home to giant spiders that could talk, and their webs could be found throughout Mirkwood. They were often hunted by the elves, and some of them were said to be Shelob's children. How they came to be in the forest is a mystery, whether they traveled from Mordor or if Sauron brought them with him, though I believe the latter is more likely. There were also other creatures such as black butterflies, black deers, huge bats, and grey and black moths that were almost as big as a hand. Towards the eastern edges of the northern forest, one could also find white deers that seemed to shine in the darkness. Now the forest was so thick that barely any light could be seen, and at night it would be pitch dark. The deeper one traveled into the forest, the darker and more lifeless it seemed to become, with barely a noise being heard, and no wind or movement of air could be felt. This made it seem extremely stuffy, and even the dwarfs who were used to tunnels felt uncomfortable there. The air also felt very tense and stiff, as if something was always watching them, and at night they would see many eyes staring at them in the distance, including white bulging insect eyes. The trees in Mirkwood were huge and gnarled, with dark leaves, and they included beech trees and oak trees. And towards the outskirts of the path, the floor was deep red in color from the fallen leaves of many autumns. One could also find fungi and pale herbs that had an unpleasant smell, though the worst vegetation seemed to be around the area of Dol Guldur, for the trees there strived against one another, and their branches were rotten and withered away. Regarding the Elves of Mirkwood, many of them lived outside of the Elven King's halls, having houses both on the ground and in the trees. In times of war, they would gather inside his halls, which would act as a fortress against their enemies, and it also served as the king's treasury and the dungeons for his prisoners. In the lowest levels of his palace, there was a stream which flowed into the Forest River, which the elves used to transport barrels back to Lake Town. The elves also used magic to protect their lands, casting spells that kept the spiders at bay, and around their border there seemed to be a spell of drowsiness, for when Bilbo and Thorin entered their lands during the feast, the lights went out and both of them fell asleep instantly. When the elves had a feast, they would light many fires on the ground, and lamps would swing from the tree branches, and the elves would sing, drink, and eat together. The Forest of Mirkwood had other noteworthy landmarks such as the East Bight, which was a large treeless patch on the eastern border of Mirkwood caused by deforestation. This in turn resulted in the segment of the forest to be referred to as the Narrows of the Forest, as it was much narrower than the rest of the tree line. We also know that Radagast the Brown lived near the southwestern borders of Mirkwood, between the Old Forest Road and the Carrock, in an area called Rosgobel. This was possibly a village of men, and I discussed this in further detail in my video on Radagast. Before ending this video, I'd like to encourage you all to check out the channel called Ambient Worlds, as we collaborated together for today's topic. He makes beautiful, immersive music that reflect various regions in Middle-earth. I actually used his music while working on this video, and it really helped me get into the topic. I'll be leaving a link to his channel in the video description and in the comments below. Anyway friends, this wraps up today's video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested, check out our Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, Discord, and Loot Crate links in the video description. And if you enjoyed today's video, leave a like, cause it helps this channel immensely, and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we'll once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-earth.